So we'll have a lesson on this Sor study. This comes from his Opus 60. This is number 14. And you can just watch the video for free and grab all the tips. You might have this piece in another book that you already own, but if you feel like it, it's part of my Easy Classical Guitar Volume 1, so there's a link for that book, ebook, under the video. So my book ranges from, grade 1 to grade 3, and this piece is certainly more on the grade 3 level. It could even be considered more on the grade 4 level, so it's one of the more challenging pieces in the book. But that said, if you learn all the shapes and you become comfortable with those shapes, and you don't take your tempo too fast, it's not that difficult. All the shapes it's all pretty straightforward to some extent, but there are a couple things that you do have to pay attention to. So we'll talk about that today. First thing, as always, we can always play the melody on its own. Playing the melody on its own will allow you to, strive for a really high quality phrasing and legato line. And if you can do that, then when you add the other voices in, you can aim to keep the musicality really high. So the melody is all the stems going up, but without those chords in there. So just the upper line. Whenever you learn a piece, because there's little grace notes in this piece, leave the grace notes out. Study the piece first. Make sure you're metrically solid so that you have a good sense of the beat. In this case, 3-4 times. So that's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Once you can play the melody on its own and you're comfortable with it, and you think it's stable, then you can add that ornament in. That was a bit extreme. And then once you can do that, then you can start adding all the voices in. So let's talk about this piece a little bit. Of course, bring that melody out of the texture. You definitely want to do that. That ornament, you're going to play it all at once. So you're going to play it as if the D is part of the chord, but then you'll crush that D into the C. So you do a pull off with your fourth finger. But it'll all be played at the same time in the right hand. And there's some rests at the end of the 4-bar phrases. This piece is very symmetrical. It has 4-bar phrases. And you can create that rest by putting your right hand fingers back on the strings. You can also use your left hand a little bit if you want, but the right hand will probably suffice. So I like to mute a little bit with both just to be safe, but that's mainly because I'm kind of recording here and I don't want it to pick up too much resonance, and the mics are right there. So you can probably get away with just muting with the right hand. So besides that, we just need to know the shapes. So I'll do a walkthrough of the piece and just talk as I go. So you just have to be prepared for those fingerings. Like sometimes you need these fingers here, like 4, 3, so that eventually 2 can just come down later. So you just have to know what's coming. It's not that hard to play though. Here, this is a little bit wormy, so what you want to do is when you're first learning something that's a little bit like mushed together, separate it and make sure you know it. So it's this, C, then first finger on E, then 4 and 2 on F sharp and A. Again, separate it into individual blocks. That way when you put it all together, you'll know very clearly in your mind exactly what your hand is doing, but you'll be sustaining some of those chords a lot more. So you have to be prepared for it, but there's a way to practice it so it's clear in your head and it doesn't get too convoluted, right? Second half of the piece. There, I'm using a first finger guide finger, so I'm just keeping it on the second string the whole time and sliding it around. And I'm using 1-3 there because of the way eventual E with my second finger. But because I can keep my third finger on that A for a little while before, we use that fingering early on. So again, there's nothing hard about that, but you do have to be prepared for it, and you have to do the correct fingerings. Otherwise, you'll trip over your fingers later in a few bars. Keeping the third finger down, that way 2 can work there. If you have trouble playing this note here with your fourth finger and it mutes out other strings, just make sure that your knuckle isn't like this, which outstretches your finger, but bring that knuckle in to force curvature in that finger, which will give you the clearance that you need. Then it's pretty much a repeat. I only have a couple of right-hand fingerings in this piece, but this is one of the spots where I do finger it. Just make sure you play the E with A, because that's one place in the piece that's a little bit faster because of that dotted eighth note. So I go A, I, M. A lot of this piece, though, you're just going to be repeating fingers for the chords because you can't really alternate all the time. So that's about it. Play the melody on its own. Make sure it's phrased really nicely. And then for this particular piece, the only thing that's hard about it is you just have to know the fingerings really well. Technically speaking, it's not too tricky. There's some fourth finger stuff that you have to be able to play, but just bring that knuckle in and make sure you're curving that finger. But besides that, just give it time. So practice it nice and slowly for a really long time. And then once it feels comfortable, I think you'll be able to do it.